Good evening from New York. I'm Chris Hayes. As you may have noticed, the news today has been dominated by the confirmation hearing for the staunchly conservative judge that Republicans are dead set on ramming through an incredibly accelerated timeline. That's Judge Amy Coney Barrett. And they're doing it at a hearing involving not one, but two Republican senators, Mike Lee and Thom Tillis, who have tested positive for COVID and until very recently apparently were shedding viral load. Hopefully that's stopped now because they're all in the room together. Just let's take a step back for a moment from the particulars of Judge Barrett, because what's been happening today isn't really about any one person. I mean, take a look at where the country finds itself right now, specifically where the Republican Party, so dead set on pushing through this confirmation, finds itself. And you've got to ask, why are they doing this? I mean, it's not what people want, right? 77% want the Senate to pass another pandemic relief package, which they have so far refused to take up. 66% want it before a vote on Judge Barrett. And with two senators on the committee having tested positive for the virus just in the last 10 days, 54% say in-person hearings should be delayed. We're 3 weeks before an election. People are voting in record numbers already. There is no economic relief apparently coming. There are small businesses going under day after day. There are tens of millions of people who filed for unemployment whose added benefits have run out. Oh, and by the way, in case you forgot about this, because Republicans like to pretend that doesn't exist anymore, we are entering a third wave of the virus, the once-in-a-century pandemic that's changed all of our lives. Right now, still, we're losing nearly 700 Americans a day. Hospitalizations just hit their highest level since August, and they are rising very quickly. And on top of that, it's not like Republicans have a cushy electoral map right now. I mean, Donald Trump is down almost 11 points nationally to Joe Biden. And the Republicans are facing an increasingly brutal Senate map. You have Democrats right now competitive in red states you would not have expected, states like Alaska and Kansas, also competitive in Montana. I mean, Senator Lindsey Graham, who should be smoothly gliding to re-election in the what had been very conservative state of South Carolina, finds his own fate up in the air. He was using his position today on the Judiciary Committee to whine about his opponent's fundraising.
I don't know what's going on out there, but I can tell you there's a lot of money being raised in this campaign. I'd like to know where the hell some of it's coming from. But that's not your problem.
So not only that, this hearing has put front and center the fate of the Affordable Care Act. That's the legislation that guarantees insurance for people with pre-existing conditions that is now quite popular. Guarantees a lot of other things, too. It's legislation Republicans have spent 10 years trying to destroy, both through Congress and the courts, so far unsuccessfully. And they are currently trying to kill it as well. They're trying to kill it in the Supreme Court a week after the election, possibly with Judge Amy Coney Barrett listening to arguments and who knows, maybe casting the deciding vote. And Republicans are whining about being attacked for this attempt to destroy the ACA. But of course, the thing that's weird about it is they could just not do it. They could, pass a one-line amendment to take it out of the court's hands. They should tell the Trump administration not to push for it. They're all obviously on the wrong side of the politics on all of this. So the question is why? Why? Why do this? The answer, as far as I can tell, is there are really two things that define the central product of the modern Republican Party. One is cutting taxes for rich people, which Donald Trump did. It's like the one legislative success, even though the American people broadly didn't want that, even though it was the lowest approval rating he ever had in his whole time in the presidency when he was pushing that. And the other is attempting to stack courts with conservative judges who can protect right-wing interests, whether that's corporations, evangelical Christians, from encroachments by an increasingly diverse and democratic national majority. Senator Elizabeth Warren put it well. This absurd hearing is happening today because Amy Coney Barrett is the last hope for a desperate, undemocratically overrepresented party trying to cling to power just a little longer and impose the agenda of billionaires, giant corporations, and far-right extremists on our country. People always complain, we're almost 4 years into this, that Republicans won't break with Trump. They haven't broken with Trump because they like what he's doing. They approve of Donald Trump. But there are things they would break with Trump over. Believe you me, if Donald Trump tried to raise taxes on rich people, they would break with him. If he tried to increased enforcement of civil rights law, they would break with them. If he appointed a judge they thought was pro-choice, my Lord, they would break with him. There's a reason that Trump promised to appoint judges who would overturn Roe and dismantle the ACA. The conservative movement has put decades of effort and organizing and strenuous activism and hundreds of millions of dollars into producing a conservative judiciary that will act, like previous judiciaries in U.S. history have acted, as a kind of bastion of right-wing reaction against a changing country, against movements for reform, against progress on civil rights, and against democratically elected legislators seeking to regulate businesses and markets. And now there's a moment to seize it, to seize that victory, and they will pay any price so long as they get what they want. They had a big success today, in fact, with the Supreme Court allowing the Trump administration to prematurely end the census count in a move likely designed by the administration to reduce the accuracy of the counts, particularly of marginalized populations, and thus reduce their voting power. And at the Senate Judiciary hearing today, Senator Sheldon Whitehouse methodically explained how hundreds of millions of dollars in conservative dark money have gone into installing judges who will pursue the project of corporations and social conservatives.
It's not three schemes, but it's one scheme with the same funders selecting judges, funding campaigns for the judges, and then showing up in court in these orchestrated amicus flotillas to tell the judges what to do.
Donald Trump literally asked these groups, Leonard Leo, who you saw there, the Federalist Society and others, which judges to install. I mean, this is just a matter of record. This is how it works. And then he does it. And it's not a conspiracy. It's just an out in the open political project. It would be like accusing Democrats of the conspiracy of like trying to have health care happen. The only thing that makes it weird is that now, on the threshold of their greatest victory, about to cross the finish line, they all get very squirrely, very tight-lipped about what exactly they're up to. Who, me? Overturn Roe? No. But as Senator Amy Klobuchar pointed out, Trump never got the memo that you're supposed to trick everyone on this and use Federalist Society code where you talk about process and procedure, judicial philosophy, textualism, and originalism instead of just outright admitting what you're doing.
One of President Trump's campaign promises in 2015 was that his judicial appointments will do the right thing on Obamacare. You can see it right here. What did the president say here? He said, September 23rd, 2020, I think this, he means the election, will end up in the Supreme Court. And I think it's very important that we have 9 justices. I don't think how much clearer we can be.
Yeah, the president is one of the few people who's honest about this whole situation. Right now, as I said at the top of the show, the window seems to be shutting on this Republican majority. Maybe. We'll see if the polls are right. We'll see if people got to vote. But you can feel it in the air. They are in trouble. Look at the expression on Lindsey Graham's face. And this, what we saw today, what we are seeing, this is one last heist before the cops show up.